So today I'd like to take a quick look at if statements. So if statements basically are these statements that allow you to perform different statements depending on the result of a condition. So you'll have a condition that will be tested, and then if that condition is true, a certain set of statements will be performed. Otherwise, that statement won't be performed. And you can change that and make that more advanced as the time goes on, but and we'll see the examples of that moving forward. But at this point in time, we just want to focus on the very simple if statements. So you can see right here, we've got the very basic if statement. Okay, so we've got this basic syntax here, and you can see in Java, you use the keyword if. Okay, so you use the keyword if and then some sort of condition and then an opening bracket. Now you'll notice that the condition is in brackets, and that's the way that you have to write the statement. So um, that's the opening line of the statement. So if I can just highlight that, right, this is the opening line of your statement right here. Um, okay, if, and then some sort of condition, and then you open your brackets, and then you have your statements that get performed. Now, you will notice that your statements are performed and they are tabbed in. You can notice here that your statements are tabbed in. And that is because anytime you use a block of code, you should always be indenting anything that's part of that block of code. And you know that you're in a block of code usually because you will open up that block of code with a bracket. So we've got if, and then the condition, and then an opening bracket, and then the statements that are part of that block of code. These statements here should all be indented. Okay. Apologize for my writing, but I'm writing on a tablet here. So um, then once those statements are finished, you're going to have your closing bracket here. Okay, so you've got an opening bracket that opens up the block of code, and then you've got a closing bracket that then closes the block of code. And down here, you can see there's an example here. So again, my opening statement with an if, and then the condition is in brackets. And you see here, I've got a variable called age. If age is greater than or equal to 16, and then I open up the bracket for my blocks of code, and then this is the line of code that I want to perform if this statement returns true. So if the age, okay, so this block of code gets executed if the age is greater than or equal to 16. Okay, so if my age is 17, it's going to check the condition, is age greater than, and it is. So then it's going to perform this statement and it's going to write out you may drive on the output. Okay. If the age was less than 16, then you're going to end up with nothing happening in this situation because all you have is an if. Check the condition. If the condition is true, then you're going to perform this statement. Okay. Otherwise, nothing will happen. Okay, because now you have the close of the statement. So the only time anything happens is if this aged here is tested, if this condition returns true. That's the only time that something's going to be happening. So then we also have a bit of a more complex if statement here. We've got what's considered what we call an if-else statement. And an if-else statement is a statement that has a combination of two, one condition with a combination of two results, which is kind of normal for any kind of selection, right? If something is true, then it happens. If it's false, what happens if it's false? So that's the condition that you've got here is a situation where you might have something performed if the statements are true and something performed if the statements are false, and that's the else part. So you can see here the basic syntax. You've seen the if condition before, but then notice here's the addition right here. Okay, so you'll notice that we end the if statement by closing the bracket, and then we use the keyword else, and then we open up that bracket again, and then again, all of these statements are indented, and this is what happens if the condition is true, or sorry, if the condition is false. So these ones perform if the condition is true. Okay, and then again, we have to close the entire block of code or close this else block of code by having a closing statement. Okay, so to kind of look back at the example from below, from the previous slide, you can see if age is greater than or equal to 16, system.out.println, you may drive. We've already seen this part, but then you can see here we add the else component. So if the age is not greater than or equal to 16, or if this test returns false, then it's going to jump down and it's going to perform the else portion. So it's going to print out you may not drive. So, and then you can see this closing bracket here. So we could do two tests. If the age is 17, then it's going to jump into this statement, and it's going to jump into this statement here, and then it's going to print out, you may drive. If, however, the age is 13, it's going to skip over this statement because it's not true, but then it sees the else and it says, okay, so if anything else is true, then we want to do this. Okay, so this is the false part, so it's going to print out you may not drive. Okay, so that's our if-else statement. And then we can see that we can take this one step further and a little more complex, and that is in our if-else if statement. So in an if-else if statement, everything is the same as we've already seen. The only difference we have here is that we now have some conditions. So there's multiple conditions. So this is when you would have a situation where there might be more than one choice that's possible, or more than one option that you want to check for, or more than two options that you want to check for. So if you want to check to see, if there's, based on a list of things, have they selected option one or option two or option three or option four? So in that case, you can create what we call an if-else if statement. And again, the setup is exactly the same. You can see that basic syntax right here. But the difference here is that instead of now, so you see here, we close this first bracket right here, but then we use the else if statement. Notice else if is two words. For those of you who did Visual Basic before this, else if was one word in Visual Basic, but in Java and in most language, else if is two words. Okay, and then we open up the bracket for the else if so there's a condition listed, so the second condition is listed, and then we open up the bracket for the statements that are going to be performed. Also notice in each else if statement, okay, you have everything is tabbed in. So everything that's part of that block of code gets tabbed in. Okay, then you see another else if statement, so we close the bracket for this else if. There's the second else if with a condition. Again, the third condition in this case, open up the bracket and then perform these statements. And then almost always in an if else if statement, you want to have an else as well. So if none of these conditions return true, so if this one doesn't return true, if this one doesn't return true, and if this one doesn't return true, we want to jump into something that checks for any other option and then perform these statements. Okay, so if nothing else is true, it will perform the statements at the bottom. And then again, we have to close that statement using a closing bracket at the end. So the example I like to use is this example of grades because I think it's the most obvious to you. So you can see here, the first check is if grade is greater than or equal to 90, then the letter grade is equal to an A+. And then it keeps working its way down through all the different letter grades. Okay, you can see here, if the grade is greater than or equal to 80, right here, then the letter grade is equal to an A. If it's a greater than or equal to a 70, then the letter grade equals B, and so on and so forth down until the final one is, if it's none of the above, then the letter grade has to be an F because it has to be below this 50. Now, one of the important points to note about an if-else if statement is that in an if-else if statement, you are, anytime it actually finds a true statement, so as soon as it hits a true statement, it will perform the condition. If as soon as it finds a condition that's true, it will perform the statements that are inside of that section, and then it will skip to the end. Okay, so it's important to note that because that will affect the way that you write your if statements. Okay, so let's just take an example and we'll use this letter grade example here um, to check the idea. So let's say the student got 78. Okay, so what happens is the selection statement starts at the top and works its way down. So we're going to go to this statement first. So if grade is greater than or equal to 90, then the letter grade is equal to an A plus. So is it greater than or equal to 90? Well, no, it's 78. So it skips over that, okay, and it doesn't perform that, and then it goes to the next check. So it checks to see if the grade is greater than or equal to 80. Is it greater than or equal to 80? Nope, it's 78. So we skip down to the next section. Is it greater than or equal to 70? Yes, it is greater than or equal to 70. So we perform the statements that are inside that if statement. So now we're going to make a letter grade equal to B. So we have a variable called letter grade, and right now it's going to be equal to B. Okay. Then what happens is once these statements inside this part have been performed, and there might be more than one statement, in this case there's only one. So once this has been completed right here, once it performs this line of code, okay, then it won't keep checking. Okay, so it won't check it won't check this line, it won't check this line. What it does is it jumps down to the very end of the statement. So it jumps down, it has already found a true statement, so it performs or a true condition, so it performs the statements, and then it jumps down to the end of it, and it continues working on any code that might be listed down here. Okay, so in that way, you see that in the end, now our letter grade will be B, which is what we want to achieve. Okay, you can imagine how things might be different if that was reversed. So for instance, if we started off at the top and we checked to see if the letter grade was greater than or equal to 50 and worked our way up, that wouldn't work as well. Because if it checked to see if it was greater than or equal to 50, okay, then it is greater than or equal to 50 because it's 78, but it's also greater than or equal to 60, and it's also greater than or equal to 70. So it would just keep working its way up. And in that case, we have to be careful because what would happen is it would check the 50 at the top. If we put 50 at the top, it would check to see if the grade was greater than or equal to 50. It would be. It would assign the grade of D, and then it would jump to the end. So we really got to be careful about the order that you put your if, else if statements in to make sure that you're not skipping over content that actually might be true. So you just have to be aware of the different operators that you need to use in order to write a comparison statement. So you can see here, it is slightly different in Java, and you have to note that equal to is actually a double equal sign in Java. So when you are comparing two numeric values, you have to use the double equal sign. You can't just use a single equal sign because the single equal sign, okay, so a single equal is the assignment operator. It assigns a value, right? And we've seen that before. So in order to compare two things, you have to use this double equal sign. Okay, you have greater than, less than, greater than or equal to. You can see that you just put the two symbols right beside each other. Same thing with less than or equal to. And then not equal to is the less than and greater than sign put together. Okay, so those are the comparison operators that you may have to use in any kind of any kind of selection statement. So when you are testing the condition, when you're writing the condition, you're usually going to be using one of these operators that is listed here in this section. And then finally, you have the ability to create what are called compound statements. And what compound statements allow you to do is uh, test multiple conditions and then use either like and or reverse the conditions. So and, in the case of an and comparator, both conditions have to be true in order for the result to be true. So I think of an example of that might be like logins. So when you do logins for school, both the username and the password have to be correct in order for the login to be successful. So you're going to be using an and operator and ensuring that both conditions are true. The or operator is a double vertical line. And the or operator means that only one or the other option needs to be true in order for you to, um, in order for the condition to be true, or in order for the result to be true. The example I like to use for this one is car seats. Now, I don't know, this is just one that's familiar with me. Hopefully, I'll explain it briefly. But with car seats, once a child reaches a certain um, uh, uh, how do I word this? Once they reach a certain age, so there's three different requirements that might get a student or might get a child out of a car seat. One is their height, one is their weight, and another one is their age. So if they meet the height requirement, then they can go out of a car seat. Or if they meet the weight requirement, so if their weight gets up above a certain weight, then they can be out of the thing. And then the last thing is age. So if they reach a certain age, they are also exempt from being in part of a car seat. So that's a part of Canadian law. There are these three requirements, but they don't all have to be true. Only one of them has to be true in order for the child to no longer be required to be in a car seat. Okay, so that's a good example of how an or might work. If the child is above a certain height or has hit a certain weight or is of a certain age, they no longer have to be in a car seat. Only one of them has to be true in order for this to be true. Then the last thing is the not operator. And the not operator reverses the result of a condition. So you may be in a situation where you want to check to see if, and again, the best example I can think of this is a password application, kind of similar to the login one, but with a password application, if you know what the password is, you can say, if the variable is not the password, then perform these statements to start the login screen over again or whatever. Okay, so you can see the basic syntax is here. So notice with an and, any type of condition other than the not, it's a special case. You have if, and then notice there's two sets of brackets. There's actually three sets of brackets here, but the first is for the actual if statement itself. So you can see there's a bracket here and a bracket over here, and those are for just the if statement itself. Then each condition has to be in its own set of brackets with the and symbol in between the two of them. Okay, so there has to be a set of brackets for each condition. And then you open up your block of code and perform any statements that might be, or put in any statements that might be required after that. Okay. In an or, you have exactly the same requirements. There's your if, there's the opening of the if statement, the closing of the if statement, and then there's a condition plus the or statement in between, and then any statements that you want to perform are listed below there. Don't forget to close your bracket at the end of it. And then it's the same thing with a not statement. You'll notice that there's a bracket here and a bracket here that opens up the if statement, but then the condition itself is also in its separate bracket, and there's the not statement that reverses the result. So if this condition returned true, then this whole statement would end up returning false because we've got this reverse that happens here. Okay, and just a very quick example here, you can see if a student is supposed to be in school, we have a requirement that they must be greater than 4 years old, greater than or equal to 4 years old, and they must be less than or equal to 18 years of age. And if both of those conditions are true, then they should be in school. So we want to perform that statement. So again, you can see the opening bracket, the closing bracket, and then each condition has its own bracket around it with the and symbol in between.